And now we'll leave the floor to the first session of this policy dialogue, which I hadn't mentioned. It is a panel on the clash of Turkey's and the European Union foreign policy, moderated by our colleague Olga Oliker, Program Director for Europe and Central Asia. Thank you very much for the patience. Olga, over to you for the first panel.
Hello. Okay, I think this is working. Thank you so much, Giuseppe, and thank you very much for everybody for taking part in the opening, and for all of you for being here. So this session, like the sessions that will follow it, draws on the analyses and recommendations that are presented in Crisis Group's annual issues of the EU Watch List, the Watch List 2020, and its May and September 2020 updates, and builds also on the engagement and assessment of our EU team based in Brussels, which Giuseppe leads. So Crisis Group analysts, joined by panelists from other organizations, expert panelists, are going to talk about how the EU can play a stronger role in conflict prevention and peace building, and address the key policy challenges to generate stronger prospects for peace. Before I begin, I just want to remind everybody that this meeting is on the record. It's live streamed on Crisis Group's YouTube channel, although only the folks who are taking part via Zoom can participate and ask questions and comments. So this panel is focused on Turkey and the EU, a perennially interesting conversation that has become even more interesting over the last few months. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. We have, in alphabetical order, Nigar Goksel, who is our Turkey project director at International Crisis Group. We have Ioannis Grigoriadis, who is associate professor at Bilkent University and a senior research fellow and head of the Turkey program at ELIAMEP. We have Zaur Shiriyev, our South Caucasus analyst here at International Crisis Group, joining us from Baku in Azerbaijan. And we have Ilke Toygür, who is a CATS fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs and an analyst at the Elcano Royal Institute. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to talk to the panelists for a bit, ask them a few questions, they'll give a few answers, really just conversation between us, and then we're going to move on to a question and answer session with other folks on the call. So here's how that's going to work. As you're listening, questions will occur to you. Prepare them. And what we will do after chatting for about half an hour is start answering them. So there's a little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and enter your question there. You can also vote for questions that other people have already asked. Please also do that, because I am going to select questions on the basis of the semi-democratic process, in that I'm going to choose first the ones that have the most votes. And I will do the asking, but I believe I'll be able to identify who asked the questions. So again, this is being recorded, and let's get started. So I am going to jump right in and ask Nigar, who follows this very closely, these dynamics. How is Turkey asserting itself as a regional power, and in which regions? What has changed in recent years about Turkey and its role in the world?
Thank you, Olga. Well, broadly speaking, I guess it's particularly since 2016 that we see Turkey projecting military power more in its neighborhood, to increase its foothold in places that it sees either, in some cases, risks, in some cases, opportunities, born out of changing power configurations. And this is supported sort of by political elites, both of nationalist and Islamist leaning, but not only, in that most of the opposition parties also support this increased activism, particularly for example in the East Med, and also with regard to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Of course, Libya is a case that has been the forefront a lot when in January, Turkey intervened to protect the GNA, the Government of National Accord, from collapse. That's just one of the examples of Turkey sort of stepping in to support capitals or political communities that it sees as being either threatened or disregarded by other actors, particularly Turkey's adversaries, that if Turkey were not to step in and other countries, which in most of the cases would be either Russia or UAE, Egypt, were to step in, it would be against Turkey's interests, sometimes strategically, security-wise. In Syria, for example, it's very much security, or economically, sometimes it's based on economic interests. Infrastructure contracts play a role in some cases. So it's hard to generalize. I think there are different dynamics in each conflict. In some conflicts, Russia deals, well, in many of them, in Libya, in Syria in particular, deals with Russia, makes deals with Russia in some cases, in Syria in particular. Yeah, and I guess Turkey also champions the sort of cause of what it sees as downtrodden Muslims, not only in the neighborhood, but also in the West. And that's in a sense, it's sort of calling that Turkey or Turkey's president has sees in themselves. I think the government, through doing these, it's in some cases, it's very strategic, with geopolitical minds being very much in the forefront, but it's also an element of domestic popularity. And we see, by and large, support in the society for the interventions of Turkey abroad. There's a sense of pride of Turkey being on the side of the moral and the just and the principles, so fixing the voids, filling the voids, and correcting the wrongs of the international community. There's also a sense of preventing an orchestrated attempt by axis that's adversarial to Turkey to contain Turkey and weaken Turkey via weakening its president. So there's a rally behind the flag sentiment. And there are also gains in some cases, strategic and economic gains born out of intervention abroad. This can be defense contracts, it can be, again, infrastructure, consumer markets. You're having an axis of allies in the neighborhood to push back against the axis that Turkey thinks is leaving Turkey under siege.
Thank you, Nigar. That's fascinating, and it's so complicated. Ioannis, I was wondering if you could jump in and talk a little bit about how Europe sees this, how this aligns and misaligns with the interests of various European countries, including but not only Greece.
Well, we shouldn't forget that the Greek-Turkish rapprochement that started about 20 years ago was based on Turkey's EU path. So there was a hope that improving EU-Turkey relations would create a normative framework and a set of incentives so that both sides would resolve their outstanding and long-standing disputes through peaceful means and through dialogue and adjudication. So in that respect, Turkey's increasing self-confidence and an assumption that Turkey needs the EU more than the EU needs Turkey, that has become more popular among the highest echelons of the Turkish administration in recent years, has led the situation to a deadlock to some degree. Why? Because from the Greek point of view, or from the Cypriot point of view, there were no incentives, no carrots to give to Turkey to solve the problems alongside the principles that like Greece or Cyprus or the rest of the European Union member states would like the resolution of the conflicts to be, i.e. through dialogue or through negotiation or through adjudication. So in that respect, Turkey's growing self-confidence and its willingness to engage in a number of regional disputes in a unilateralist manner has generated a sort of a more dangerous regional environment. And we need to add to that, of course, the discovery of natural gas resources in the Eastern Mediterranean that has sort of added a new dimension to the issue. And of course, Turkey's deteriorating relations with Egypt and Israel, which are, this is a development independent from the Greek-Turkish relations. And of course, Turkey's direct involvement in two civil wars, like in Syria and Libya. So under these circumstances, Turkey appeared willing to take bigger risks. And then the Greek government felt that it had to respond, especially following the signature of this Libya-Turkey memorandum about a year ago that challenged the rights of exclusive economic zone to all Greek islands in the Eastern Mediterranean. This brought Greece into a situation whereby it felt it had to respond. So by engaging in bilateral relations with countries like Egypt or the UAE, or by taking a more assertive position on the bilateral disputes. So it is a quite dangerous environment.
So I want to bring Ilke into this conversation. Nigar mentioned the role of Russia. Ilke, could you talk to that a little bit, and then also kind of give your perspective on what Nigar and Ioannis have just said about these dynamics and how they've evolved in recent years?
Thank you very much, Olga. I think when we are thinking about Russia and Turkey, what they have in common is the desire to change the status quo in the region and beyond. The reasons they have may change, may differ, but I think this is the desire they have. And beyond that, they also know how to put their differences aside and collaborate whenever it is necessary. And their perspective of personalization of foreign policy very much helps the foreign policy making beyond the traditional institutions and such. So I think when it comes to the region, it is clear that both Russia and Turkey are trying to be players beyond the usual regional suspects. When it comes to the dynamics related to the European Union, I think I share the observations of the colleagues that this is clearly a dangerous situation and very different than Libya, Syria, and Nagorno-Karabakh. In case of the tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean, the EU's own proper member states are at stake. Of course, in case of Libya, for example, the French interests or the Italian interests are at stake. But in the case of Eastern Mediterranean, the member states are bilaterally involved in these conflicts. So I think that the case of Eastern Mediterranean is very important in that regard. When it comes to the EU, I think we can add, we should be differentiating the EU as a supranational institution and its member states, because I think there are so many issues that are going on when it comes to the decision making in the institution. We have, I think they all agree on the objective to find a common policy to I would say to keep Turkey as a close ally, but they very much differ on methods and instruments. And I think France and Germany are leading different pathways in that regard. I can elaborate further in the coming moments, but I think what we have seen in the European Council in the beginning of October was a positive agenda offered to Turkey just based on the Eastern Mediterranean and good neighborly relationship and respecting sovereignty and security of Greece and Cyprus is an unprecedented development, because until now, all these positive agenda items were related to the democracy, rule of law, and human rights situation, and more widely the Copenhagen criteria, the fulfillment of Copenhagen criteria. And we are seeing a change of pace there. We can, of course, argue that this was also the case when the EU signed the Turkey-EU statement on refugees, but I don't want to get in there. But we are seeing a clear policy, a positive agenda offer, which was led by Germany, put out there on the one side, and we are seeing a very much assertive France with a leader that is at direct fight with President Erdogan. On the other side, that is looking to confront Turkey with using different instruments. I think I will stop there, and I will elaborate further.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there that I want to come back to and bring some of the other folks. And what I'll start with actually is this notion you've introduced that Turkey and Russia both want to change the status quo. Now, we have just seen a war restart in Nagorno-Karabakh, where it had lain dormant for 26 years after a ceasefire in 1994. So Azerbaijan and Armenia just fought for 6 weeks in a conflict that really did very much change the facts on the ground. And Turkey played a role in supporting Azerbaijan in this. So it changed the status quo. Zaur, how important was Turkey to this, and how do you see this? What does this look like from Baku?
Thank you, Oli. I think that the Turkey was always been a very important country for the region. For both Azerbaijan and Georgia, and Turkey in 19th Turkey was expected to play a role as a policy of integration with the West, and also Turkey had succeed construction of oil pipelines that drive Azerbaijan economic growth. So the Turkish agenda in the 19th was actually integration of the Azerbaijan and the Georgia to West, but and also Turkish-Azerbaijan relation has a strong the cultural and the linguistic affinity, but they have they keep the independent decision making. However, I think that the key date might be a change of the Azerbaijan and Turkish relations. I think that since 2010, especially in the defense industrial cooperation, and when Azerbaijan and Turkey signed the strategic partnership the agreement, which placed to support each other using all possibilities in the case of military attack or aggression against either of them. And since then, I think Turkey start playing an important the country in development of Azerbaijan defense industry. But still, I think that Turkey, if you look to the map, the list of the countries who Azerbaijan has a military procurement policy, the Russia comes first, then the Israel, then the Ukraine, the Belarus, and Turkey is not in the list of the first three countries. And why? And Turkey role has changed since this war. First of all, I think that Turkey not only played the role of the with support militarily, that giving this the Bayraktar, the drones, but also Azerbaijan see the first time that the role of the Turkish education to Azerbaijani the military officers. So that most of the officers who played a key role in this operation, I think that was Azerbaijanis who actually educated in Turkey or the Turkish instructor programs in Azerbaijan. So what we will see in the future, the Turkish role between Azerbaijan and Armenia in this three direction. I think the first will be the Turkey will become a security guarantor for Azerbaijan, especially since the second the Karabakh war, and it's not written in the agreement, the Russian brokered the agreement, but I think that Turkey, based on the 2010 strategic partnership agreement, Turkey probably we will see the Turkish troops presence in Azerbaijan, either in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflicts or not. So it doesn't change the narrative or expectation in Baku. The second, I think that in military field in the future, we will see the more Turkish role. And since I think taking into account that Turkey is going to modernize its defense industry, and Turkey will be much more independent by 2023. And also, I think Azerbaijan is going to cut its military budget, and Azerbaijan is going to modernize its army. So, for instance, this year Azerbaijan defense the budget was $2 billion and $200 million US, but I think we will see the more cut because there will be much more money for investing this regional development. So I think Turkey will become in the next 5 years probably one of the first the countries which are in defense industrial cooperation between for Azerbaijan. And the third element, I think Turkey with after second Karabakh war, I think we will see that a new transport corridor between Azerbaijan and Turkey, and land connection through Armenian territory, and so this will actually eliminate the monopoly of the Georgia in the land and the connection between the Azerbaijan and Turkey. So since 19th, I think that all of this, the routes connected Azerbaijan and Turkey was through the Georgia, and right now I think the Turkey and Azerbaijan found a new way of the connecting with new transport corridor. So in the three aspects, I think I see that Turkey and Azerbaijan, the relationship will develop in the future more.
Thank you, Zaur. So Ioannis, I'm wondering, does Greece and does broader Europe care all that much about what happens in Karabakh, or is the attention much more on the Mediterranean? All the stuff that Zaur has described, is that important? Is it relevant? Is it perhaps not seen as important, but maybe should be?
Well, I think the situation is different from country to country. France and Greece, for example, because of historic links with Armenia, have sort of showed some degree of interest in the conflict. But on the other hand, it's also a matter of capabilities. And the European Union has very often been criticized for failing to play its own role in conflict resolution and conflict prevention in Europe and beyond Europe. Of course, when we talk about Nagorno-Karabakh, we talk about a region which is on the limits, on the outer limits of the European continent. But definitely, I think it's a very good example and food for thought for European analysts and European politicians, because I do think that Europe's credibility as a global player is based upon its ability to have a common voice and be able to provide support for its own values and the implementation of its own values throughout Europe and beyond. So in that respect, I think that Europe's voice was too weak, and that should be a lesson for future. And this needs to be reconsidered seriously by Brussels.
Thank you. So Ilke, do you agree with this? And do you see any clear ways for which Europe can have a louder voice?
Actually, I have one additional point when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh. I think it was important for the European Union in some aspects, and two of them are, first of all, in all the other conflicts that Turkey was involved, it was justifying its involvement with its own national interests. And in case of the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, it was, even if it's understandable, it was not that obvious that the Turkish national interests are at stake. And I think this was one point where the Europeans said, at least the Europeans that would like to confront Turkey in a harder manner, said that, look, they are getting involved in every regional conflict. Why shouldn't we be more vocal about this? And the second aspect was, I think there was a ceasefire in that in the first weeks, and Turkey denied to fulfill that ceasefire. And I think it was an important point for the Europeans to demonstrate that the Turks will be there for the fight in every sense. So I think these points were important conclusions from the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict for the European officials. And I very much agree with what Ioannis said on the credibility and the voice of the European Union. The core issue is, I think, that the European Union, and I would be very happy to discuss this, is that having issues to have a common position, this is very clear because of the foreign policy being a national competence and the member states having different interests, but also lacking instruments to resolve the conflicts in its neighborhood. And Cyprus issue is the core of them. We have witnessed what has happened in Ukraine. Then Nagorno-Karabakh came. There are very many issues in the regional agenda, which is the EU's immediate neighborhood, but the EU is not necessarily equipped well enough. Again, I'm talking about the supranational institution, not the member states, in these cases to prevent the conflicts or resolve the crisis or help to the resolution of the crisis.
Thank you. So Nigar, what, from Turkey's perspective, how does that play out? I mean, does Turkey see pulling again on another thread that Ilke brought up, right? This tension between the EU versus the member states. From Turkey's perspective, is it dealing with the EU? Is it dealing with the member states? Does it care what the EU thinks, or is it really just a matter of the specifics of some countries and not others?
I think that's a very good question, and I'm going to really try to reflect a Turkish perspective. I mean, Turkey isn't an EU member, and even EU members themselves are not in cohesion necessarily in terms of their interests and priorities in the neighborhoods. When Turkey looks at the EU, it's not an effective foreign policy actor. It's not on the ground in any of these conflicts. It doesn't have hard power there, and these are conflicts where the parties with hard power are directing where the conflicts go. So even if the EU had leverage over Turkey, it doesn't have the ability to stop Russia or the UAE. It doesn't really have the credibility in a strategic sense, in my view. There's also a sort of the view in Turkey that if the EU is going to put its weight behind every member state whenever they have turf wars or rivalries, economic or security or otherwise, with Turkey, then I mean, then it's going to be very difficult for Turkey to take the EU to have a strategic dialogue, a strategic cooperation with the EU per se. I mean, as much as the EU may need to stand behind each member state, then in Cyprus, if Turkey has a dispute with Greece, it's going to be unconditional support for Greece. If France has an issue, it's going to be unconditional support for France. That's not really, I mean, then you have to be on the EU's, if you don't act on the EU's term, then you're going to be called a malicious actor. So I think there's a problem from Turkey's perspective that the EU sort of complains about what Turkey's doing, but doesn't have the instruments or have anything on offer that would actually meet Turkey in the middle, where both of them would be able to share, both get a little bit of what they want and find a middle way. The expectation that Turkey's interests would necessarily align with the EU's in any of these neighborhoods, I think is a too high an expectation.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask folks listening to start preparing and asking and voting for questions. I want to turn to the questions very soon. But before I do that, Nigar mentioned, and it's absolutely true, Turkey is not an EU member. But there used to be some notion that one of the carrots the EU had was the prospect of membership. Is that just... I mean, is this all a facade at this point, all the accession talks? Is this something that has no real meaning behind it anymore? Or is there still a story here? And Ilke, I'll start with you on that.
Thanks, Olga. I think it is very clear now that the accession negotiations are not working. And the problem here is that since it's the main framework to relate between Turkey and the European Union, there are various tensions coming out of it, because let me put out an example there. We are seeing European Council putting out the conclusions in the beginning of October, stating that there will be a positive agenda if and only if Turkey fulfills Turkey plays along in the Eastern Mediterranean. Let's put it that way, in a very summarized version. Then we are witnessing a report from the European Commission, because the institution is writing reports on the assessment of the candidacy status of every country, every candidate state. And then we are seeing lots of criticism there. And then we are seeing the European Parliament's reports as an answer to that, again, underlying various dimensions and various critics. So when Turkey looks out there and says that, okay, I might play along in the Eastern Mediterranean, but my relationship with the EU is not going to improve in any case, because there are so many issues on the table. So we have the accession negotiations framework, it is there. And for some, it has to be there for the future, because if the negotiations are finalized right now, that it will be almost impossible for Turkey to reopen them in the future, even if the country fulfills all the requirements. And for some others, having the accession negotiations there in a stalemate, frozen, not working, is mainly harming the relationship, because every tool in the toolbox of the European Union that might be valid for other countries are not valid for Turkey, because it's a candidate country and a NATO member state. I should also underline that, and a NATO ally, because that's another side of the story.
Thank you. So Ioannis, do you agree or do you have a different take on this?
It is a very long discussion because the accession negotiations started almost 15 years ago, and they started with a lot of ambition and a lot of hopes. Nevertheless, there was decreasing interest on both sides, I think, which sort of led the process to a freeze. In a sense, on the one hand, many European countries, including France and Germany, shifted from the full membership to the privileged partnership discussion, which many in Turkey consider to be a sort of violation of a promise and a violation of the terms of the original agreement between the two sides. On the other hand, as I said before, many in Turkey thought that we no more need the European Union because we can be successful on our own. And the importance of the European Union in promoting democracy and the rule of law in Turkey diminished because the government shifted its course. And now Turkey is no more considered to be democratizing. We talk about the democratic backsliding and serious human rights and rule of law issues in the country. So in that respect, both sides have agreed to keep the accession process on a sort of in a coma condition, because they consider that ending it is going to generate more trouble on both sides than keeping it as it is. So we're looking for an alternative framework to develop a relationship that is viable and mutually beneficial. And that's not easy. There are discussions, and Ilke participated in a paper on this, on how to use the customs union agreement, for example. A revitalized customs union agreement as an agreement that can serve as a normative framework that can promote an EU-Turkey relationship, even though the membership is not viable in the foreseeable future. But I think this is an issue that also lies behind the Eastern Mediterranean conflict, because it is also about rules. And what sort of Turkey has been doing, and what attracts the reaction of Greece, and then follows the European Union response, is to take some unilateral actions by drilling or sort of conducting explorations that assume that Turkey has sovereign rights in certain regions of the Eastern Mediterranean, which Greece considers to be its own. So in that respect, like let's say, the rules-based approach would be to negotiate this and then refer the issue to the International Court, in the International Court of Justice. But to the extent that this is not happening, then the same question is raised again. So are we having the same rules? Like, do we agree on the normative framework on how to resolve our disputes? Can we agree that we disagree, but we agree on the way to solve the disputes? This is, I think, fundamentally important.
So Nigar, what do you, I mean, from a Turkish perspective, how would you look at this? Is accession dead? Is it just, kind of on life support because nobody wants to kill it, but also nobody wants to give it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because what does happen if it sits up? Is that how it also looks from Turkey?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. It's on life support. I think I would say it's not a good time to try to redefine the relationship, because it's a time of so much toxicity, and you're going to redefine into a structure, something that will determine a big stretch of time ahead. And it seems like the good time to do that is not when you're in such sour terms. So there is, I think, a shared interest in keeping it there, particularly taking into account that once you end the accession process, you need all of the EU member states to restart it, which seems like it would not happen for a very long time. I mean, EU has lost any conditionality. I mean, with the accession process stalling, the conditionality that the EU had that gave it leverage over Turkish domestic politics has really gone. And so I think one of the problems is the rightful very strong feelings about the rule of law and sort of political witch hunts and whatnot in Turkey that are in the EU spill over into foreign policy issues as well, and make it hard to cooperate on issues where the two sides, Turkey EU or Turkey member states, actually have shared interests. So the unfortunate situation is that both are important, but they need to somehow be separated in some cases, where you need to be able to talk about Libya separately from Azerbaijan, separately from political prisoners. It seems to me, at least. And I mean, one also has to, I think, consider that even if Turkey was a full liberal democracy, as long as it's not an EU member, or even if it is an EU member, it's going to have different interests in the neighborhoods in a different place. It has different relations with Azerbaijan. It has different threats and opportunities in Syria. So I think, in some way, there needs to be a track of dialogue that that doesn't bleed into each other when it comes to sort of normative issues versus strategic interests.
Thank you. So I'm starting to get questions both in the Q&A box and from YouTube, which apparently is also possible. But before we do that, I want to bring Zaur in on this point with a very specific question. The tension between the EU and Turkey, right? We talked about how the relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan in part was initially viewed as bringing Azerbaijan closer to Western countries. With Turkey at odds with so much of the EU, is partnership with Turkey still as appealing, or does it actually have some risks and costs for Azerbaijan now?
As you rightly pointed out, Turkey played a role of the bridge between Azerbaijan and the EU in the 90s, but I think since 2000 they won't need any Turkish help or support in this case, because there are development of the bilateral relations between Azerbaijan and the EU. But also the failure of the Turkish accession to EU was always been an example for Azerbaijanis that integration to EU is a long way, and also sometimes there are some. It couldn't be, might be we cannot realize this, and also might be it distracts Azerbaijanis so much from any idea of the integration to EU. But I don't think that what's happening within EU and the Turkey will impact Azerbaijan-EU relations. But with one exception is that if there will be member state relationship, for example, Turkey, France. Relationship is impacting Azerbaijan-France relationship. So, but not as an institutional level, but in the member states level, yes, we will see. We already saw this impact during the war, and I think so. It will also we can witness the similar things in the future if there will be some tensions between the member states, and similar to not only France and Turkey, also the Turkey and Greece. We saw the first time in the last years that it has also the impact to Azerbaijani relations with these EU member states. But overall, I think the EU still has let's say, good tools to play a role in the post-war situation in this conflict, in this particular conflict.
Thank you, Zaur. So I'm going to ask the first of the questions that I have that came in from YouTube, which I think follows nicely on the conversation we've been having. And it's from Hakan Yapar, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. But with all of this tension, with all of these things that divide the EU and Turkey, do you, and I'm going to target this to Ioannis and Ilke, do you see the EU Council increasing sanctions on Turkey, or do you see it taking its time to do that and trying other tools first?
Well, as the situation is right now, I could not rule out the possibility of sanctions, because the situation has been quite tense. And I think it very much depends on what the Turkish government is willing or able to do in the coming days on a number of fronts. Mm-hmm. For example, there was a statement by the Turkish president that surprised many on the positive, that Turkey sees itself within the European Union. That was the first positive statement in many, many weeks or months of this sort. And many anticipated that this could lead to a move. For example, the release of some of the political prisoners, as like everybody sees them in Europe, Asmin Osman Kavala or Ahmet Altan or other intellectuals, or Selahattin Demirtas, the former leader of the Kurdish party in Turkey. But more recent developments have shown that this is not likely to be the case. So it is a very difficult period for EU-Turkey relations. And in that respect, of course, the Eastern Mediterranean situation doesn't help. So we do need some contacts between the two sides and some concrete steps. So a positive agenda is coming back, because otherwise we may end up in a vicious circle of recriminations and sort of mutual hurting, which would be a very big shame.
Ilke, do you agree?
More or less. I think there are 2 weeks yet until the European Council meeting, and 2 weeks are a really long time when you are dealing with Turkey. So I think the intention, at least thinking about the German presidency of the Council, the intention would be to keep the pledge of positive agenda on the table and not move from that, and luckily postpone this issue a bit further, because the European Council also have a very busy agenda beyond Turkey in December. But we have to see what is going on in these 2 weeks. I think Turkey did not step towards the right direction, looking from the European perspective, in the Eastern Mediterranean. But I am aware of the negotiations and diplomatic talks that are going on, not only between Turkey and the European Union, but also between member states. Because I think, as I have been hinting from the very beginning of this panel, is that the European Union, especially when we are talking about the European Council, they are not necessarily agreeing on the methods and the instruments to achieve the same objective. So I think the sanctions are there. We should also remember that the targeted sanctions were already applied for individuals when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean case, but increasing their dose and severity would be an important, at least symbolic decision, because the impact of the sanctions are still yet to see, because it depends on the size. But again, in any case, sanctioning an EU candidate and a NATO ally when it comes to foreign policy will be a big symbolical move, and we will yet still should see if the EU is ready to do that, at least in December. 2021 is another story.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to the question with the most votes in the Q&A box, which is Giuseppe's question right now, which is basically, is this personal, looking specifically at the recent deterioration of relations between Macron and Erdogan? Is that impacting overall EU-Turkey relations? And indeed, what is the role of individual leaders in all of this? And I'll give Nigar the first cut at this one, if she does not mind.
I mean, French-Turkish relations have a long history of problems. Human rights has always been an issue. There have been civilizational issues, laicism versus sort of Muslim sensitivities. Now, of course, there are business and strategic turf wars, let's say, in the neighborhood. Both leaders have a very sort of toxic discourse from time to time towards each other. I mean, they're both serving, obviously, different constituencies. Erdogan's appealing to both within Turkey and outside sort of Muslim sensitivities, the sort of civilizational cause, but Macron as well sort of seems to have a civilizational cause. Turkey, President Erdogan is very sensitive about Islamophobia, so I think they're feeding off of each other in a sense with relation to appealing to their own constituencies. And yes, of course, I think it's very important. I mean, there was the really positive French-Turkish relations that I remember, at least the only time was 2002 to 2007 when Chirac was president. And that was exactly when Turkey was also making leaps and bounds to align with EU criteria. I mean, that was a very positive period. And then the negative period started with Sarkozy, when Turkey was deemed civilizationally not fit for EU membership because of its religion. So I think, I mean, we sort of look at the past trends. It matters a lot where France stands. So yes.
Thank you. So Ioannis, I'm just wondering if you have a different view or a similar view on this.
No, I do think that personalities matter, and the way that the Turkish constitutional reform has reshaped the executive in the country has put more emphasis on the role of the president. So the relationship between Turkey and France is less institutionalized than it used to be, like 10 or 15 years ago, when the foreign ministry or the diplomats or bureaucrats could have an influence on this. As the situation is in Turkey right now, the president himself and his advisors have an enormous impact on the course of development. And there has been a very problematic personal relationship between the two leaders that has compounded all this strategic competition between France and Turkey on a number of fronts. So it's not just in the Eastern Mediterranean, it is in Sahel, it is in on a number of different issues, and it is also on this Islam versus the West civilizational debate that is used by both leaders for their domestic political constituencies. Let's not forget that Macron is likely to face Marine Le Pen in the next presidential election, so he needs to protect his back against the criticism that makes Macron appear weak or sort of unaware of the threat that Islam is bringing to Europe, the perceived discussion.
Thank you. So coming back to this upcoming European Council meeting and the many, many things that could and are happening, we have a question from Lisa Musil asking specifically about the recent inspection of the Turkish vessel by Operation Irani. Is that going to change things? And I'm going to give Ilke the first chance to respond to that.
Actually, this situation was not necessarily the ideal right before the European Council meeting, because also we have seen a case that where Germany and Turkey were face to face and not necessarily played well into the dynamics. For me, this case has shown once again the necessity to collaborate between the European Union and Turkey when it comes to foreign and security policy. I think it was a clear example of where tensions are not necessarily helping, and efficient collaboration will be way more beneficial instead of all these, can I search your ship because I suspect that you are not fulfilling our arms embargo? No, you cannot. And we are NATO allies. Do you remember that? You know, I think this was for me, this was a solid demonstration of the real necessity to collaborate between the European Union and Turkey beyond words. If I may chip in about the Macron question, because that was for me a burning desire there. I think it's very important about what Macron thinks and does, and I think it's the case for anything about the European Union. No, nothing moves until French and the Germans agree on it. But beyond that, we will see in 2021 and 2022 two very important electoral turnouts, both in Germany and France. And in the meantime, France will also take over the presidency of the Council in 2022 in January. And I think these will be very important. These periods and these elections are going to be very important when it comes to Turkey-EU relations as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to answer a question, or I'm going to pose a question and have you answer from Sinan Ulgin, who wants to know, and this is addressed, I think, first of all to Nigar, how much can Erdogan actually do if he wanted to improve the relationship with the EU, given that he needs to continue his alliance with MHP? Is there room? What can he do? And then, so I'll ask Nigar first, and if others want to jump in, they may.
Very difficult question for me to answer. I mean, I think it's important actually to touch on this issue. The power dynamics in Ankara are extremely complicated. President Erdogan has to reckon with networks in the bureaucracy and in the people in the parliament who have very strong Eurosceptic, West skeptic leanings, and he needs their vote in parliament, and he also needs their buy-in in the security bureaucracy. So I think the European or Western often assumption that President Erdogan has a free hand to change course whenever he wants is sometimes misfounded. Though he is very masterful in making turns, he's very pragmatic. He has to do so with also calculations of different segments that he needs to get on board domestically. So I think that, I mean, we can see these days, and it was mentioned by Ioannis just a few minutes ago, there was a clear attempt in the palace or in Ankara by some segments to appeal to warm relations with the EU in recent days. And you saw a very strong backlash from other segments, and then there was sort of a retreat. So it's complicated, and I think it's something that Europeans need to take into consideration a lot when they're devising policies towards Ankara, because you need to think, impose sanctions. Who is it empowering? What happens in Ankara 2 steps down the line, and is that going to serve the purpose that was intended? Is it going to lead to the behavioral change that is wanted? It's obviously, I understand that there's an intention, desire, a wish not to be too tough on Turkey, but sometimes the consequences end up having different unintended consequences, let's say.
Thank you. I'm going to take one last question that is sitting here, and because we're running low on time, and then we're going to have to close up. But the question is from Calixtavia, and it's the question is, how can you explain the coincidence of Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Russia all supporting the Maduro regime in Venezuela? And what could be the impact of this on EU-Turkey relations, given the EU role in trying to resolve the Venezuelan crisis? And I don't know, who wants to take that one? Do I have a volunteer?
Well, I can try answering this. I think that there are certain similarities in the sense that Erdogan came into power with a strongly populist agenda, and Maduro came to power and stayed in power, like arguing that he's defending the interest of the Venezuelan people against the elites that are going to, they don't represent the true interest of the people, but the interest of foreign powers, or so they're illegitimate in that respect. And in Turkey's attempt to claim a global role and play a solo game in a strategic sense, it tried to engage many of the countries that appear to be pariahs internationally. And there have been some important economic relations between Venezuela and Turkey. So this is something that needs to be highlighted. But I do think that in the end of the day, and that would be my answer both to this, to how this relationship is going to evolve, as well as on this question whether Erdogan is going to sacrifice MHP, or can he sacrifice MHP? I think it's the state of Turkish economy that's going to define foreign ambitions and foreign sort of priorities, foreign policy priorities. So if the Turkish government is cornered on this issue, it might be willing to make some very significant concessions, or might be willing to look into EU-Turkey relations with a completely different perspective.
Thank you. And we are very sadly out of time. This has been such an interesting and rich discussion, and I really would like to have another half hour, 45 minutes to go deeper into so many of the issues that have been brought up. Just such a complicated situation, but instead, I'm going to thank our panelists. Thank you, Nigar, Ilke, Ioannis, and Zaur for taking part. And I would like to also thank everybody who joined in, asked questions, and listened in. Thank you all. And just to let you know, you will be getting an evaluation feedback form, participants, listeners. Please do fill it out. It helps us improve and fine-tune events like this so that they are more useful to you. Thank you, everybody. This was really terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.